Last week, I think we talked about Daniel, the man, and that was following a couple of meetings where we went over the fact that global climate change is coming, and it can't be stopped. It doesn't make any difference what mankind does. And in that process, we went over the fact that not only is it coming again, but it has come many, many times in the history of mankind, to say nothing of before the history of mankind. But in thinking about Daniel, of course, the reason I like the book of Daniel and was led in my thinking to the book of Daniel is a lot of the things that we went over in the book of Revelation that indicate that climate change is coming. Severe climate change is coming. And that we can't do anything about it is the prophecies that John shares with us in the book of Revelation. Daniel gives prophecies that coincide with and harmonize with many of the things that we find in the book of Revelation. And by the same token, they coincide with and harmonize with things that we find in the book of Ezekiel, the book of Joel, the four Gospels, particularly the Lord Jesus Christ, as he foretold what was coming on Israel. As we come closer and the time comes, that's referred to as the day of the Lord. But when I think about, and I've spent quite a bit of time this past week just reading in the book of Daniel, and actually Ceci and I are still reading in the book of Revelation. We started again, and I started trying to get things squared away in my head with Daniel. And it's interesting how every time you go over it, well, you come up with something that you missed before, and I assume that'll be true till I die. I sometimes think maybe I've gotten to the place in life where I learned a lot of new things that I learned new 20 years ago. And somehow I get to learn them again. I forgot them. But I almost always, when I'm thinking along this line, stop and think, I wonder how many people, and I'm sure that most of them don't, but how many people in the world who have no regard for the Bible realize that if they would study this book, they would know a lot about why things are happening as they are happening today, and what's going to happen in the future, and why a lot of their efforts to resolve man's problems and bring peace on earth are going to fail. They'd understand a lot of that if they would. And if they would read it and study it, particularly as it relates to the nation Israel, they would realize why it is that we have every reason to believe it's inspired of God, just as illustrated by what was prophesied beforehand that would happen with the nation Israel, and it did happen, has happened already, and then ongoing things that Israel has involved with, that mankind, primarily we in the United States, primarily have been probably the strongest ally of Israel, benefactor to Israel for a long time. And others have been doing all they can to exterminate them from the face of the earth. More than one group of people have tried that down through their history, and nobody's succeeded. That ought to say something, I would think, to most people. Just look at that from a human level, Say, here's a book that prophesied things that were going to happen to Israel 100 years before they happened, 50 years before they happened. And it also prophesied some things that were going to happen hundreds of years before they happened. And then there's some things that prophesied beyond where we are. And maybe just common sense would tell some people to say, I ought to check it out. I really, because, when you look back on the history of mankind, everything that man has tried to bring peace on earth has failed. Everything. And you can go back to to the nation Israel. You can go back to the nations that existed prior to the flood. Now, the Lord brought some peace on earth for a little while there, but that didn't last, because once man gets involved in it, why, he messes it up. And then the nation Israel and the Babylonian kingdom of Nebuchadnezzar, and then the Medes and the Persians and the Greeks, and then finally the Romans, and then we in the history of the United States had, and that was before, I think, my time. I think I've been told about this. I don't think I knew anything about it. Maybe he wasn't even born, I don't know. The war to end wars and make the world safe for democracy, which one was that?
World War I.
World War I, yeah, that's for my time, see. But it didn't work. It didn't work. The world is not safe for democracy, and still today, the President of the United States is concerned about trying to make the world safe for democracy, really. And the concept that if everybody had what we call a democratic government, that the world would have peace. But we don't have peace in the United States.
That's right.
So how in the world could that be the solution? And so, but when I stop and think about all of the money that's spent trying to bring peace on earth, I can't grasp it, really. I can't. I the other day heard what it costs to keep Air Force One in the air, and per hour. And I mean, it's enough money that I can't comprehend a bill like that. You know, what it burns up in money in a day. And then there's a second one right behind it. It's identical to it, and it goes everywhere it goes. And I don't know whether that's included in the cost or not. So maybe it's already included. But the number is so much that I can't comprehend it. And yet, if I don't know what they would do different if they knew that it's not going to work. If they really believed it's not going to work, I don't know what they would do different. Everybody's always saying, well, if I was president, but I don't know what I would do different if I was president. I'm sure would do some things different, a lot of things different if I could. But one thing the President of the United States finds out pretty quick is there's a lot of things he'd like to do different that he can't, really. But anyway. I'm sure that most people, that particularly if they haven't studied the Bible, don't even dream about the prophecies regarding Israel that were made before they happened and recorded and are recorded in the Bible, and did happen. They did happen. They probably never stop it and even think about it. And I think one of the things that's really important when we think about these subjects is to realize that, okay, there's a lot of information about what happened in the past, what's going to happen in the future, and a significant amount of information about why, but there is virtually no information that will enable us to pin down when. And I think that's, if we don't get that, if we don't figure that out and get that settled in our heart and mind, then there's a real temptation to try to figure out when. You know, that's a real challenge. You know, it must be some way we can figure out when. And Daniel talks about the 70 weeks of Daniel, that the 70 weeks that remain, and Jeremiah talks about the 70 weeks, and yeah, well, there's a starting point. And then Daniel sees a vision, a prophecy that carries him from where he is to the future, you know, and to the end, till it all wraps up. And if you could do your calculation, why, you ought to be able to come up with pretty close to when that's all going to happen. But that time's come and gone. And for skeptics, that's reason to make fun of it. For those who study the Word and want to know the truth, they recognize the fact that, as the Apostle Paul revealed when he came on the scene, that there's a period of time that was a mystery not revealed in other ages. And so we can never put it all together time-wise, because nothing defines the period of time in which we live right now. We know when it began, just like we know what Daniel saw began with the command to go forth and rebuild. But when is it going to end? You know, it looks like we ought to be able to figure that out real close when you read through there, but then you can't. And then you wonder why. And probably the Jews wonder why, some of them, because there's some Jewish scholars that are very knowledgeable of the Hebrew Scriptures. But it doesn't fit. And yet they reject the Messiah, and they don't believe the writings of the Apostle Paul as being inspired, even though he was a Jew and was accepted by many Jews, still is accepted by many Jews as being an apostle of God. So we can't figure out when, and so it's a good idea that we not spend a lot of time trying to. And in fact, for me at least, I'm not prepared to spend a lot of time trying to figure out exactly when this prophecy was fulfilled, and this is talking about exactly that king, and exactly, I'm going to let, for me, I'm still working on that, but I don't know that it'll ever get figured out, sorted out. But one of the things that I've found, and I hope in this, what we're doing, that some of you are encouraged, and that's what I want to do, is encourage you to read kind of carefully Revelation. Read kind of carefully the book of Daniel. Read kind of carefully the book of Jeremiah, the book of Joel, the book of, and of course, the Gospels, the words from the Lord Jesus Christ, because they're there for our learning. What's in the Hebrew Scripture is there for our learning. What's in the Gospel is there for our learning. What the Apostle Paul wrote about the day of the Lord, and what Peter wrote about the day of the Lord, it's all there for our learning. Just, we have to remember, it isn't there to tell us when. It's just there to tell us what and why in some cases. If we were to go to Jeremiah 25, we'd read, the whole Israel shall be a desolation and an astonishment, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. Well, there's a time frame. And then there will come to pass, when the 70 years are completed, we're told in verse 12, that I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation and the land of the Chaldeans for their iniquity, says the Lord, and I'll make it a perpetual desolation. And then in chapter 29, Jeremiah comes back to it again in verse 10. But thus says the Lord, after 70 years are completed at Babylon, I will visit you and perform my good words toward you and cause you to return to this place. Didn't that happen? They didn't all return, but they were able to go back and to rebuild. And so, again, to me, it's I don't know whether I've been negligent whether it's been negligence on my part that I haven't devoted more time to Daniel and Revelation and some of those prophecies. I don't feel that way, that it has been, but there might be. You know, we can all justify whatever, but as I've said many, many times, for the most part, I said, in fact, to one of my grandsons, when you're raising children, well, that's what you're trying to get out of the Scriptures. What do I need to raise children? I'm not trying to figure out what I would need to do to bring peace on earth, you know, or the confidence that it's not going to happen. That's not what I'm doing. So when I go through the book of Daniel, I kind of a summary. I mean, this is going to be really quick. I took it and divided it up into 5 sections. And basically there's the dreams that Daniel interpreted, starting with Nebuchadnezzar, for Nebuchadnezzar, and the dreams that Daniel had, and God gave him the interpretation. And so we start out in chapter 2, then there's Nebuchadnezzar, and it's revealed to Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel and to us in turn that Nebuchadnezzar was the dominant Gentile nation, Gentile ruler, the head of gold, the best, the strongest, that will be in the future of the Gentile nations. And I would understand that his image takes us all the way to the end of the times of the Gentiles. And then in the 7th chapter we pick up in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. Again, in that a vision, and the people and languages above should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion. We start picking up the one that had the everlasting dominion. And that, of course, is the one that God establishes. In Daniel 8, we get a vision that was a ram pushing north, south, east, and west, a goat, multiple horns. We were reading Revelation yesterday morning with my grandchildren, and they were talking about, you know, when you read about the dragon and the beast and the false prophet and the animals with multiple horns, and the little horn pops up and a horn gets broke off, and I was trying to explain to them, he's talking about an animal. It's using an animal to illustrate, you know, or one like a leopard, one like a, and so when you go through and read those accounts, generally, if you keep reading, it'll explain the meaning of the prophecy. And if you don't stay with it long enough, well, you'll come and say, "Oh, I don't know about this dragon," you know. Well, but then it'll explain who the dragon is. In Daniel 9, in the first year of Darius, Daniel understood by the books the number of the realm of the Chaldeans. And in the first year of his reign, and Daniel understood that what the Lord said through Jeremiah the prophet, that's what I read just a moment ago, that he would accomplish, and that 70 years in desolation of Jerusalem, and he was given that information that there would be a covenant made, and that in the middle of that covenant it would be broke, and the abomination that makes desolate would be set up in the temple, and that really troubles Daniel. Then in chapter 10, it's the third year of Cyrus, the king of Persia, and again, he's being told, we're told in verse 14, what will happen to your people in the latter days, all the way down to the end. And also the message was true, but the appointed time was long. I'm giving you some information about what's going to happen to your people, but it's way down the road, way down the road. And to me, it's interesting that Daniel keeps struggling with that time element until the end of the book of Daniel. He's still right down to the end, wondering when, you know. And so then in chapter 11, this first year of Darius the Mede, and then there's battle of the kings between the kings of the north and the kings of the south. And then there's news from the east that disturbs them. And there should be time of trouble. And then in chapter 11, did I say 11? Yeah, I said 11. Darius the Mede. And then when we move out of chapter 11, we move to chapter 12, obviously. And again, Daniel's told there's going to be trouble such as was never since there was a nation. Even to that time. It's never been like it. And something worse than ever. But your people will be delivered. They're going to be delivered. That's all in 12:1. And then Daniel was told, after he got the prophecy, seal the book, shut up the words, seal the book until the time of the end. Okay, that's I'm not going to be. You're not going to get any more information. Close the book, and we'll be good for the time of the end. And then in chapter 12, starting with verse 11, and from the time of the daily sacrifice is taken away, and the abomination of desolation is set up, talking about the break in the covenant between the one who presents himself as God and desecrates the temple of God, shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits to the 1,235 days. But you go your way till the end, for you shall rest, and will arise to your inheritance at the end of days. So Daniel never got the answer to when. All he was told was, it's going to be a long way down the road. And you're going to go to your rest. In other words, I would understand, you'll die. And then you'll be resurrected, and you'll get your inheritance, but it's going to be way down the road. And that's consistent with what we have in a number of scriptures, Matthew 24:36, Acts 1:7, the Lord Jesus Christ talking to those that he saw after he rose, and they wanted to know when they were told to wait in Jerusalem till they be endued with power from on high, for John indeed baptized with water, but you'll be baptized with the Holy Spirit not many days hence. Is this the time you're going to restore again the kingdom to Israel? It's not for you to know. It's not for you to know. The times or the seasons which your Father had in his own power. It's not for you to know.
It can also say that neither the Son of Man.
That's
in 24. It says that.
That's in Mark's account. No one knows, not even the Son. Yeah. In 1 Thessalonians 5, we have the same thought. In 2 Peter 3:10, and so we're not supposed to know. It's okay. We don't know. And I stumbled on something the other day that was kind of interesting. I know and have known that there's a lot. The way we have kept track of days and years and months from, say, Adam and Eve to today is certainly anything but consistent. and things have been moved around for various reasons, sometimes to accommodate certain pagan holidays, sometimes, even I guess the names of our days have its roots in the worship of pagan gods and goddesses. But I ran onto a web page that the title of it is BibleChronologyTimeline.com, and it's an interesting web page because, as far as I can tell, you see, and there is no, and this is one of the things that's interesting to me. But let me make my point. According to the web page, I would say the bottom line is you can't figure it out, because there's been too many different ways in which mankind has made up calendars and kept calendars and counted days, and they start back with initially the evening, the morning were the first day, and the weeks, but the date keeps getting moved around, fudged around. The length of it, the accurate number of days in a month and in a year, and then that's why we have leap years, and then in years back they did it a different way. And so the bottom line is, from what I got from it, I haven't studied it, but I read it, skimmed it, that there really is no way. Even with all the technology that we have, and all the computers that we have, and all the ways to do rapid calculations and all that kind of stuff, you still have to make assumptions. If you're going to try to match all of the chronologies and things in the Bible to a current calendar, you have to make some assumptions. So that being the case, I don't have much confidence in people's assumptions. We've got some people making assumptions in what they call models on a computer, and they've made assumptions and concluded that islands were going to go under the sea that haven't. They're still sticking up just as far as they ever did. And the weather is going to be this and that, and it didn't. And that we were going to run out of oil on the earth. This was back when I was going to school. They were telling us that we just had a few years before we were going to run out of oil. Well, when you start making assumptions, especially as it relates to God's plan, God's program, or God's creation, even your best assumptions, you have some missing pieces. And so then your conclusions aren't accurate either. So I say that only to say this, that I found that interesting, and if you want to run it down, I'll be glad to give you the webpage address it only confirms the fact that it's not for you to know. So it doesn't make any difference. And then when you get right down to it, okay, let's suppose that you could figure it out. How many people in the history of mankind had the ability or the knowledge to figure it out? Almost none. Almost none. Even if it were today, how many people would have, if somebody really did figure it all out? Not that, because there's no way that they could figure out when the day of the Lord's going to come, because we're living in a time frame that isn't dated. So we don't have any way that we can figure that out. But let's suppose that you want to figure out exactly when Christ was born, because everybody doesn't agree on that even. Okay, but suppose you could figure it out. How many people would have the ability to do what we're told to do in Scripture, prove all things, hold fast what is true? Almost none of us. I mean, I don't even have the ability to figure out whether what the guy said as to how complex and confusing it is true. Except that I see pretty consistent testimony that it's probably very confusing. So let's go back to Daniel chapter 2 and look at Nebuchadnezzar and his dream. The deal was that Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. And not unlike many of us, he woke up in the morning and said, I had a really strange dream last night, but I don't remember what it was. I've done that quite a few times. I think most people have done it at least once, probably, or twice or more. I don't remember what it was. Well, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and he didn't know what it was.
And it was bothering him.
And it was bothering him. He knew that it was important, probably, but he couldn't remember the dream. And so he calls together all of his wise men, and he says, I want to know the dream. and all the Chaldeans and the magicians and the astrologers and the sorcerers and that are listed in verse 2 of chapter 2, they said, well, king, good. Tell us the dream. We'll have to give you the interpretation. Well, I don't remember the dream. So you tell me the dream, and then give me the interpretation. And his logic was very logical. If you have supernatural powers, and God or our God or whatever God that they worship, that he's given you the power to interpret my dream, if I could remember my dream, then surely he'll give you the power to remember my dream. And they said in verse 10, there is not a man on earth who can tell the king's matter. Therefore, no king, lord, or ruler has ever asked such a thing of any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean. And of course, it's pretty obvious that if you tell me I had this dream and I'm supposed to know how to interpret dreams, I can tell you whatever I want to tell you. How do you know whether it's true or not? And then if I tell you something's going to happen next year, and next year comes and goes and it doesn't happen, well, then you'll know. But right now, you don't know. You can't know. So, and for the most part, if not really, they didn't have supernatural powers. It's a difficult thing that the king requests, and there's no other who can tell the king except the gods whose dwelling is not with flesh. You know, when I read, and there's several references like that in Scripture, I believe people know, I believe God has revealed to people that there is a true God, and anything else is counterfeit. And they know it's counterfeit. Don't ask me to do something that's really, really supernatural. It can't be mind over matter. It can't be a psychosomatic problem that I can enable to help you with. But it's like for years my father, most of you know, I guess, that that I had a brother that never spoke, he never walked, he never talked, he laid in a bed, and my mother took care of him, and the only communication we ever got that he would scream for hours sometimes and draw up like he was in pain. And sometimes I'd hear discussions between my father when I was a boy and people who believed in so-called faith healers. And my dad would challenge him, you bring him out and cure my son. And told him what the situation was. Never one ever came out. Why? Because they knew, just like these astrologers knew, what you're asking, O king, is something that's not within the purview, you might say, of anybody other than the God who doesn't dwell with flesh. And we don't have that kind of power. And so the king said, okay, off with your head, in essence. And so they're going to round up all the soothsayers and astrologers and magicians and the council of the king, and they're going to have a capital punishment, mass capital punishment. And then Daniel hears about it, and Daniel says, okay, don't rush to judgment. Give me a little time. And so then Daniel tells Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And in verse 18 we read, that they might seek the mercies from God of heaven. That's the one that doesn't dwell with men, the God in heaven. So Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. So Daniel blessed the God of heaven, and Daniel said, blessed is the name of God forever and ever. This is an expression of thanksgiving on the part of Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I believe, for God revealing to Daniel Nebuchadnezzar's dream and what the dream was and the interpretation of it. And Daniel is properly thankful to God because it saved his life.
That's right.
And a whole lot of other people's lives, which probably were all false, but their life was saved anyway. Blessed is the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. He changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. And to me, that's one of the things throughout this line of thought, this line of study is it expresses and should impress us with the power of God. Should cause us to revere God, to glory God, to be grateful that the God who created everything that we enjoy loved me enough that he cares for me and he'll do something for me. And he loves me enough that he's told me how I should live, that I might be able to get the best out of life and then be with him and get the best out of eternity for all eternity. How can you beat that? And yet the vast majority of people in the world, I believe, don't believe there is a God like that. And Daniel is saying he changes times and seasons. He removes kings and raises them up. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and secret things. Yeah, he knows all of them, and he reveals whichever ones he chooses to. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with him. And to me, the foolishness of people is unbelievable. It's inexhaustible, the foolishness of people. We were talking before we started the meeting here today. Somebody was saying they'd heard somebody say that the problem between males and females is because the doctor pronounces male babies males and the female babies females, and I don't know how that changes anything, but anyway. And if they didn't do that, why, they would get along better. You know, I don't care what you call them. You know, male, female, blue, black, or red, white, or come up with a name, you know. They're different. You know, they're different. They were created different, males versus females. They were designed by God different. He established that. You're not going to change it because you don't like it. Because God, but how many people believe in a God like that? How many people believe that? And then he thanks, verse 23, I thank you and praise you, O God of my fathers. You've given me wisdom and might and have now made known to me what is asked of you, for you have made known to us the king's demand. So then he tells them, don't destroy the wise men. I got the answer. And so Arioch quickly, in verse 25, brings him before the king and says, I found a man of the captives of Judah who will make known the king the interpretation. And the king answered and said to Daniel, whose name is Belteshazzar, are you able to make known to me the dream which I've seen and its interpretation? And Daniel said, you bet, king, I can make known the dream and the interpretation. No, that isn't what he said. And again, all of this does two things. It should help us have a great appreciation for God and his might and his power and his concern for mankind, but also an appreciation for Daniel the man. No, he didn't, verse 27, he answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the king has demanded, the wise men and the astrologers and the magicians and the soothsayers cannot declare it to the king. They can't do it. But there is a God in heaven. But there is a God in heaven. I think that's a phrase that if we could have that stamped in our brain, you know, whatever the situation is, there is a God in heaven. If we're being persecuted for our faith, there is a God in heaven. If we are suffering because of poor health, there is a God in heaven. If relationships within the family are not what we would like for them to be, but we can be true to God knowing there is a God in heaven. We can do the right thing in any situation because there is a God in heaven. We don't have to get angry. We don't have to get you know, I know some people and I do believe there's a God in heaven. But in the challenge of life and all that Satan has thrown at them, they forgot.
They're willing to compromise.
And one of them left his wife and went off with another woman, somebody I know. He forgot that there's a God in heaven. There's a God in heaven. So again, Daniel, verse 28. There is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Okay, this is you're going to find out something about what's going to happen way down the road, even from where we are today. Even from where we are today. Your dream and the vision of your head upon your bed were these. As for you, O kings, thoughts came to your mind while on your bed about what would come to pass after this, and he who reveals secrets has made known to you what will be. But as for me, this secret has not been revealed to me because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but for our sakes, who make known the interpretation of the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your heart. Think about that. That you may know the thoughts of your heart. And I think it's interesting because this dream that Nebuchadnezzar had is an image of a man, a statue or an image or of a man. And it has a head of gold. And it has a chest of silver. And it has a belly and thighs of brass. And it has legs of iron. And it has feet and toes of iron and clay. And when the interpretation is given to Nebuchadnezzar, he said, this picture portrays what's coming in the future relevant to kings. He doesn't say kings of the Gentiles, but the significant empires of the Gentiles is what it represents. And he says, and you, O king, are the legs, no, of iron, tough, strong king, no. He said, you, O king, are the head of gold. And that reveals something, I believe, about Nebuchadnezzar's heart. Because what did Nebuchadnezzar do? He went out and built an image. But it was all gold. And I think in his heart, he's thinking, I'm going to perpetuate my kingdom of gold. And there's not going to be silver after me, and there's not going to be brass after that, and there's not going to be iron after that, and there's not going to be iron and clay after that. I'm gonna. And I conclude that because of what happened when he did that. See, what happened when he did that? And because the next thing that he had was, and I'm jumping way ahead of my story, but he has everybody come out and bow down and worship this image of, I believe in his heart, Nebuchadnezzar. Because God took issue with it. And God tells him, and actually Daniel warns him, you need to change from your lifestyle. You do some things that are not pleasing. We'll spend some more time with it, but I believe that in this image, he learned something, and he did learn, and he did say, Nebuchadnezzar did say, now I honor and extol and worship the God of heaven. He learned something about his own heart. And that's interesting to me, at least, that at this point, Daniel's telling him, you're going to know what's going to happen in the way of kingdoms, but you're going to know the thoughts of your heart. So then Daniel describes the image as I just did, down through verse 32, and then he says, let's read it. 32, the image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. And you watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. And then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, the gold were crushed together and became chaff upon the summer threshing floor. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So what? And so then we need to go with the interpretation. This is the interpretation. You, O king, are a king of kings. For the God of heaven has given you a kingdom of power and strength and glory. Do you think Nebuchadnezzar looked at it that way? No, I don't think so. I think if he credited anybody, it would be the false god that he worshipped, and not the God of heaven. But that's who gave it to him, the God of heaven, regardless of whether he worshipped him or not. And wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field and the birds of heaven, he has given them into your hand, and has made you ruler over them. You are the head of gold. That's pretty, play on words, that's a pretty heady compliment. You are the head of gold. And this is the God of the universe that has made this observation. And he knows because he put him in that position. He made him that way. But after you, verse 39, shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours, and then another, a third kingdom of bronze, and which shall rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, much as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. And like iron that crushes, the kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. Whereas you saw the feet and toes, partly potter's clay and partly of iron. Well, that's iron strong like the legs are, but with the clay makes the whole thing kind of weak. Yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, but just as you saw the iron mixed with the clay. And as for the toes of the feet, were partly of iron, partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. And you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay, that they will be mingled with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. So, whether we like it or don't like it, I think anybody that believes that this is inspired of God, as far as I know, agrees that the Roman government was probably the legs of iron, and we're probably down in the feet and toes of iron and clay. And there's a lot of strength in the world. But look, you know, President Trump went around and as far as I know, he did a pretty good job of trying to negotiate with and bring into harmony. I heard Rush Limbaugh yesterday explaining what and why President Trump was able to do what he did, and he talked about the psychic of the Japanese and the psychic of the Americans, and anyway, his theory as to why, from again Limbaugh's perspective, that Trump was successful in getting something from the Japanese and getting them to do something, and he said, I think he really started negotiating with the Japanese before he was elected, because he, on the campaign trail, man, he accused them of everything under the sun, and they were expecting him to be a really hard-nosed, mean sort of a guy. And then when they sit down at the table and negotiate with him, why, he's quite willing to negotiate trade deals that are, amiable trade deals for both sides, and that they can see something in it that makes them feel like they got what was in their best interest. But what he wanted was cooperation in dealing with North Korea. And they weren't interested in dealing with North Korea unless it benefited them, and it's not going to benefit them unless it's going to enable the President of the United States or motivate the President of the United States to make trade deals with them that are not too bad. They may not be as good as they were, but they're good enough that they feel like they did all right. Now, I don't know whether that's true or not, but that's a pretty tenuous basis on which to try to make peace on earth, And he, he goes to Korea and he goes to China and yeah. But is it going to last? No, it's not going to last. Is the United States strong? Yeah, relatively strong. Is Russia strong? Yeah, relatively strong. Is North Korea? I don't know. It's kind of a loose cannon right now. But yeah, there's a lot of strength in the world governments. But there's nothing to keep it together. It's not going to hold together. So just based on what we have with this revelation, we shouldn't expect that there's going to be any peace on earth as time goes on. And the closer and closer we get to the end of time, to the day of the Lord, the less there's going to be. And so then he's, in verse 44, in the days of these kings, the end, the feet and toes, the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom. The God of heaven will set up a kingdom. Well, now that's still different. The God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all of these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Inasmuch as you saw the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure. So when the stone cut out of the mountain without hands smites that image on the feet and toe, Gentile nations are going to be out of the picture. They're going to be destroyed. They're going to be like dust. It's all over for them. And again, I at times try to think in my mind, what difference would it make if Donald Trump came to believe that's what's going to happen? I don't know. You know, it's hard to believe. I mean, hard to figure out what. But based on what I know about, and as we went over the other day when we were talking about global warming, that when God begins to destroy, people are not going to, in huge droves, are not going to turn their heart to God. That's not what they're going to do. So even if they believed it was going to happen, I don't know that it would make a big difference. Verse 46, King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face prostrate before Daniel and commanded that he should present an offering and incense to him. And the king answered Daniel and said, truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, since you could reveal this secret. Then the king promoted Daniel, gave him many great gifts, made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, chief administrator over all the wise men of Babylon. Also Daniel petitioned the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over all the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel said at the gate of the king. And the next thing in the account is, the next chapter, Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold. 110 feet high by some calculations, mine, which are always subject to correction. And the king Nebuchadnezzar sent word together, the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the province to come to dedication of the image which King Nebuchadnezzar set up. And of course, in the account, and I'm going to skip it, not because I think it's not worth taking time with, but because it really is a story or a meeting almost by itself. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, of course, they didn't bow to the image as they were told to, because that would be to sin against God. And Nebuchadnezzar had them cast in the fiery furnace, heated 7 times hotter than it was supposed to be. And they didn't bow, they didn't bend, and they didn't burn, as the songwriter said. And when Nebuchadnezzar looks in there, he says, well, there's one in there, looks like the Son of God. What's going on? And I see these men walking. They're not crispy critters at the bottom of the fire or chunks of charcoal. They're walking around in there. And when they take them out, I look at verse 27 of chapter 3. Satraps, administrators, the governors, the king's counselors gathered together, and they saw these men on whose body the fire had no power. The hair of their head was not singed, nor were their garments affected, and the smell of fire was not on them. They didn't even smell like smoke. And so, and there's some things I don't understand. After Daniel interprets the dream, Nebuchadnezzar says in verse 47 of chapter 2, truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of lords, the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, since you could reveal a secret. Why then would he build an image to himself and tell people to bow down and worship him? I don't get that. Okay, so he did, but he did. Again, that's why I said earlier, I think it gives us a little insight into human nature.
He was pride over the fact he was the head. He
Yeah.
represented the head.
So he builds his image and says everybody to bow down and worship him, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego won't. And he throws them in the fiery furnace, and they come out without even the smell of smoke. And so he said, therefore I make a decree. Wait a minute. Verse 28. Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him, and they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies that they should not serve nor worship a god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces. Their houses shall be made an ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. But Nebuchadnezzar still had a problem. He had a heart problem. And so when we get into the next chapter, chapter 4, it starts out, Nebuchadnezzar the king, to all people, nations, and languages that dwell on the earth, peace be multiplied to you. And again, when I read through this, I think, if the rulers, the movers and shakers, if anybody really on the face of the earth would read this and come to believe it, why wouldn't it change their attitude toward God, their heart's attitude toward God? Unless you believe this is all fiction. Which, I'm not suggesting that there aren't people that do that. I think there are a lot of people that they either will with their mouth say they believe it's all fiction, they really believe it's all fiction, or they act like it's all fiction, even if they profess to believe that it's good and true. But to all peoples, nations, languages that dwell on the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I thought it good to declare the signs and wonders that the Most High God has worked for me. How great are his signs, and how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in my house and flourishing in my palace, and I saw a dream which made me afraid, and the thoughts of my bed and the visions of my head, and therefore I issued a decree to bring all the wise men and bring them before me, that they might make known to me the interpretation of the dream. This time he told the dream, they still didn't come up with an interpretation. And so, at last, verse 8, Daniel came before me, his name is Belteshazzar, according to the name of my God. So you see, he renamed Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego from their Hebrew names, consistent with his God. Why would he still call him his God? I mean, I think I would have by that time said, you know what? I don't think what I thought was my God is a God anymore. He's not a God. He's not the God that puts up kings and puts down kings. But my thought as I read through this is he hasn't got that message yet. He's impressed with Belshazzar, with Daniel, who he changed to Belteshazzar. He's impressed, but he doesn't worship God. And so he has another dream. And the dream, and let's skip the dream. I can't skip the dream. Otherwise, the interpretation doesn't make sense. I saw in the vision, verse 13, I saw in the vision of my head while on my bed, and there was a watcher, a holy one, considering down from heaven. And he cried aloud, and said thus, chop down the tree, cut off its branches, strip off its leaves, scatter its fruit, let the beast get out from under it, and the birds from heaven. And it described before that a very flesh, luxuriant tree that all of these birds were in, and the animals under. And verse 15, nevertheless leave the stump of the tree, and the roots on the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze, in the tender grass of the field. Let it be wet with the dew of heaven. Let him graze with the beast, on the grass of the earth, and let his heart be changed from that of a man, and let him be given the heart of a beast, and let 7 times pass over him. This decree is by the decree of the watchers, and the sentence by the word of the holy ones, in order that the living might know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, and he gives it to whomever he will, and sets over it the lowest of men. You know, right now in our particular culture, I think we are getting, I can't believe that people act like politicians and newscasters act like they didn't know of the immorality and corruption that was characterized by Hollywood movers and shakers and getting people, by using their power and offering to people places in movies and programs and shows and things, if they would give them sexual favors. I can't believe they didn't know that. I can't. The reason I can't is because I remember knowing that when I was just a kid. Everybody, it was talked about where I went to school, how that, in order to get positions in a lot of the movies and stuff, people had to give sexual favors. I don't know where they were. And the politicians have taken advantage of people. Surely we knew about that one. Who was it that was elected the second time after he'd been involved with somebody that worked in the White House? Clinton, wasn't it? Oh, how could they act like, oh, it's so shocking. Come on, you guys. That's all hypocrisy. But it's mankind is corrupt from the heart out, and sets over at the lowest of men. I don't know. Kings and people with authority have always, in the history of mankind, taken advantage of that authority. So in verse 18, Nebuchadnezzar tells Daniel, Belteshazzar, okay, this is my dream. Now tell me what the interpretation is. Because you are able, the last part of the verse, for the Spirit of the Holy God is in you. Why? But again, the question, and I think is it true for us that we really view God, the holy God, the just God, the all-powerful God? And so Daniel interprets the dream, and the dream is about Nebuchadnezzar, and he's going to lose his power and his might and his ability, and he's really going to lose his mind. And he went out and ate grass like an ox in the field, and his nails grew like bird's claws, and his hair grew like feathers, and 7 years, as I understand it, passed, and then bingo. And then it's interesting, he interprets a dream. But in the interpretation, he's telling about the consequences being in the field and eat like an ox. And last part of the verse, last half, I guess, of the verse. They shall wet you with the dew of heaven, and 7 times shall pass over you, till you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, and he gives it to whomever he chooses. In other words, it's clear that the purpose is, Nebuchadnezzar, you need to learn something. You need to learn something. And then Daniel gives him some advice. Well, let's read 26 and 27. And inasmuch as they gave you the command to leave the stump and the root of the tree, your kingdom shall be assured to you, after you come to know that heaven rules. Therefore, O king, let my advice be acceptable to you. Break off your sins by righteousness, by being righteous, and your iniquities by showing mercy to the poor. Perhaps there may be a lengthening of your prosperity. But at the end of 12 months, Nebuchadnezzar is walking around in his royal palace of Babylon, And he says in verse 30, is not this great Babylon that I have built for a royal dwelling by my mighty power and for the honor of my majesty? Can you believe that? And while the word was still in the king's mouth, the voice fell from heaven. King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken. The kingdom has departed from you. They shall drive you from man, and your dwelling shall be in the beasts of the field, and you shall eat grass like an ox. And 7 times will pass over you until you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, and he gives it to whomever he chose. That very hour, the word was fulfilled concerning Nebuchadnezzar, and he did that. And then skip to verse 34. See if he got the lesson. And at the end of the time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my understanding returned to me, and I blessed the Most High, and I praised and honored him who lives forever. That's what we should be doing. That should be the focus of our life, to praise and honor him who lives forever. We don't have to go through what Nebuchadnezzar went through, because by faith, we can see and believe and allow to motivate us to have respect, to honor, and to obey God. For his dominion, Nebuchadnezzar is still talking in verse 34, his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation, and all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing. He does according to his will in the army of the heavens. And it's interesting, when we were reading in Revelation a couple weeks ago, under the altar, every tongue, nation, people, thousands and thousands and 10,000s, and an innumerable number of people. And so we think, oh well, in the United States we're really important. No, we ain't nothing. Bad English, but it's true. We ain't nothing in the sight of God. In the big scope of things, down through the history of mankind, we're just it's insignificant. And yet God loved us enough that he sent his son to die for us so that he could forgive us our sins, and he could be faithful and just and forgive us because the price was paid. And so we should be blessing the Most High, praising and honoring him who lives forever and ever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation, and all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing. He does according to his will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth, and no one can constrain his hand or say to him, what have you done? How often are we gripped like that, awed like that? I mean, I want to be all the time. I'm not all the time, but I want to be. And then he says in verse 36, at that same time my reason returned to me, for the glory of my kingdom, my honor and splendor returned to me, my counselors and nobles resorted to me, I was restored to my kingdom, and excellent majesty was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all of whose works are true, and his ways justice, and those who walk in pride he's able to abase. When you see Air Force One roll up to a foreign country and they roll out the red carpet and the military gets out and opens it, or rolls up the chute or opens it, whatever. If he's in the chopper, they open the door. If he's in the Air Force One, where they roll out the ladder, and he stands there and waves to everybody, and he and his wife come down the stairs. And everybody bows and scrapes, but it's nothing. And if he has any wisdom, if he has much wisdom anyway, then he recognizes, you know what, I'm here, but I don't deserve all this. I'm not the one that controls this. I'm not the one that's going to bring peace to the earth. The peace is ever going to be brought to the earth. But most of the people that rule in the realm of mankind don't have that thought, and they think pretty highly of themselves. And that's why many of them get to the place that they don't even abide by the laws of their own country, or in some cases, their own laws that they help pass. Because they're pretty proud of themselves. Those who walk in pride, he's able to put down. Nebuchadnezzar found out. But in the process, he saw an image, again, that gave him, but gives us a picture. We're down the road. We're down below the leg, as I understand it, of that image. And the things that were forecast in that image have happened. They have happened. And that should increase the confidence that people who know that have in the author of this book, the Bible. God, the one who sets up kings and puts them down. And when we go on in Daniel, well, Daniel will get more specific information from God as to how things are going to fall out when it's all said and done. But up to this point, we kind of are taking, you might say the image kind of picks up where Israel is cut off as far as being God's favored nation. And the times of the Gentiles began, and it's been Gentile control of the political situation on earth from that time till now. And Israel has suffered from that time till now, and will in the future for an extended period of time. I don't know how long. But someday, but that isn't a part of that image. That image only takes us up until the stone cut out of the mountain without hands smites that image on the feet and toes, and the whole thing is gone. The whole Gentile, and I would say the times of the Gentiles that the scripture, the Apostle Paul speaks of, the times of the Gentiles is fulfilled. I'll stop there. Your thoughts?